November 18, 2022, a federal courtroom in San Jose, California. A woman named Elizabeth Holmes is sentenced to 11 years and 3 months in prison. The charge? Fraud. But not just any fraud. This was the most audacious, the most seductive, the most carefully constructed lie in the history of American business. She didn't steal money from a bank. She didn't forge documents in a back office. She convinced the most powerful people on earth, billionaires, generals, senators, and some of the sharpest minds in medicine, that she had changed the world. And for nearly a decade, they believed her. This is the story of Elizabeth Holmes, the woman who built a $9 billion company on a single drop of blood and a mountain of lies. She was born in 1984 in Washington, D.C., into a family that worshipped ambition. Greatness wasn't just encouraged in the Holmes household, it was expected. From the time she could speak, Elizabeth was different. Intense, focused, unsettlingly mature for her age. When family members asked young Elizabeth what she wanted to be when she grew up, she didn't say a doctor, she didn't say a lawyer. She said she wanted to be a billionaire, not famous, not successful, a billionaire. She enrolled at Stanford University at 18 to study chemical engineering. Within her first year, she had already begun whispering about an idea so big, so world-changing, that most people would have called it impossible. What if you could diagnose hundreds of diseases, cancer, diabetes, HIV, with just a single drop of blood from a finger prick? No needles, no waiting rooms, no fear. Just one tiny drop and the answers to questions that could save your life. It was one of the most beautiful ideas in the history of medicine. And Elizabeth Holmes was absolutely certain she could make it real. At 19 years old, she dropped out of Stanford. She took her tuition money, $3,000, and she founded a company. She called it Theranos, a combination of therapy and diagnosis. Here is where the story becomes something more than a business story. It becomes a study in human psychology. Because Elizabeth Holmes understood something that most entrepreneurs never learn. She understood that in Silicon Valley, the idea is almost worthless. What sells the idea is the person selling it. And so she built a character. She lowered her voice deliberately, training herself to speak in a deep baritone that commanded attention and radiated authority. She wore the same black turtleneck every single day, a direct echo of her idol, Steve Jobs. She maintained unbroken eye contact during conversations so intense that people described it as hypnotic. Like she was looking through you rather than at you. She was, by every account, one of the most compelling human beings anyone had ever encountered. And investors opened their wallets. Within a few years, Theranos had raised over $700 million in funding. $700 million. The company's valuation reached $9 billion. Elizabeth Holmes, at the age of 30, became the youngest self-made female billionaire in American history. Her face appeared on the cover of Fortune, Forbes, and Time magazine. She was celebrated as the next Steve Jobs, except they said she might actually be better. And at the center of all of it was a machine called the Edison. The Edison was Theranos' revolutionary blood testing device, small enough to sit on a kitchen counter, fast enough to deliver results in under an hour, capable, Holmes claimed, of running over 200 different medical tests from a single drop of blood. It was going to transform healthcare. It was going to save millions of lives. There was just one problem. It didn't work. Inside the walls of Theranos, a very different story was unfolding. The Edison machine could barely run a handful of tests reliably. The results it produced were wildly inaccurate, sometimes dangerously so. Scientists inside the company knew it. Engineers knew it. Lab directors knew it. But no one spoke. Because Elizabeth Holmes had built Theranos like a fortress of silence. Employees were forbidden from talking to each other about their work. Non-disclosure agreements were so aggressive that people were afraid to speak to their own families about what was happening inside those walls. Those who raised concerns were fired. Those who pushed back were threatened. But Theranos had to keep going. because they had made a deal with one of the most powerful retail chains in America. In 2013, Theranos partnered with Walgreens. Real testing centers opened inside real stores across Arizona. Real patients walked in, gave their blood, and waited for results that would determine whether they had cancer, whether they were HIV positive, whether they needed surgery. And those results were coming from a machine the company's own scientists knew could not be trusted. Some patients received false negatives, told they were healthy when they were not. Others received false positives, leading to unnecessary treatments, crushing anxiety, and life-altering decisions based on numbers that meant nothing. And Elizabeth Holmes kept smiling, kept pitching, kept raising money. Here is perhaps the most extraordinary part of this story. The people Elizabeth Holmes convinced to back her were not naive. George Shultz, former Secretary of State under Ronald Reagan. Henry Kissinger, former National Security Advisor and Nobel Peace Prize winner. James Mattis, four-star general, later Secretary of Defense. Rupert Murdoch, the billionaire media mogul. Larry Ellison, founder of Oracle, one of the wealthiest men on earth. These men sat on the board of Theranos. They lent their names, their credibility, and in some cases their own fortunes to a company that was, at its core, a lie. How? Because she told them what they wanted to hear. She spoke the language of legacy, of impact, of changing history. She told generals that soldiers on the battlefield could be diagnosed in the field. She told billionaires the return on investment would be unlike anything they had ever seen. They never asked to see the data. They never demanded an independent scientific review. They took her word for it, and the board became her greatest shield. Because who was going to question a company backed by George Shultz and Henry Kissinger? Every empire built on lies eventually meets someone who refuses to look away. For Theranos, that person was Wall Street Journal reporter John Carreyrou. In 2015, Carreyrou began receiving tips from former employees, frightened scientists who couldn't sleep thinking about the patients in those Walgreens clinics. What followed was one of the most dangerous investigations in modern business journalism. Theranos unleashed lawyers on his sources. They hired private investigators. They pressured the Wall Street Journal to kill the story. Board member George Shultz, whose own grandson Tyler had become a whistleblower, refused to believe his grandson over Elizabeth Holmes. He reportedly confronted Tyler with a Theranos lawyer in the room. Tyler Shultz held firm. And in October 2015, Carreyrou's story ran on the front page of the Wall Street Journal. The words beneath the headline were a bomb. The world was about to find out the truth. Once the story ran, the walls came down fast. Federal regulators launched an investigation and found the lab operating so far outside standards that they moved to ban Holmes from the blood testing industry for life. Walgreens terminated the partnership and sued for $140 million. The board members quietly began distancing themselves, and the $700 million was essentially gone. In 2018, the Department of Justice indicted Elizabeth Holmes and her secret partner and COO, Sunny Balwani, on multiple counts of wire fraud and conspiracy. The government's argument was simple. They had knowingly deceived investors, doctors, and patients. People had made life and death decisions based on results from a machine they knew didn't work. That was not ambition. That was not a dream that fell short. That was fraud. The trial began in August 2021 and captivated the world. Holmes arrived every day composed and impeccably dressed. Her defense was as audacious as her entire career. She claimed she genuinely believed in the technology, that she was a true believer who simply fell short of her vision. And in the most stunning move of the trial, she took the stand herself and told the jury that Sunny Balwani had psychologically and sexually abused her throughout their relationship, that she had been under his control, that she was as much a victim as anyone. The courtroom went silent. The jury deliberated for 7 days. On January 3, 2022, guilty on 4 counts of fraud. In November 2022, she was sentenced to 11 years and 3 months in federal prison. She was 38 years old. The story of Elizabeth Holmes is easy to reduce to its most sensational elements: the fraud, the lies, the black turtleneck, the fake voice. But the real story is about something more unsettling. It is about how badly the world wanted her to be real. Silicon Valley had such a desperate appetite for the next Steve Jobs that it consumed its own skepticism. Investors who should have demanded data instead demanded to be in the room. A culture that celebrates disruption above everything else had created the perfect environment for someone willing to pretend to disrupt something she had never actually built. And those powerful men on her board, with decades of hard-won wisdom, perhaps wanted so badly to be part of something historic that they never stopped to ask the most basic question: does the machine actually work? There is also the question that will never fully go away: the patients. The real human beings who made decisions about chemotherapy, about medication, about whether to tell their families they might be dying, based on numbers that meant nothing. Those people are rarely mentioned in the headlines. They are the true cost of the lie. Elizabeth Holmes began serving her sentence in May 2023. Theranos officially dissolved in September 2018. Its assets auctioned, its laboratories shuttered, its machines dismantled, and the single drop of blood that was supposed to change the world was just blood. In business, we are taught to admire the bold, to celebrate the visionary, to forgive the dreamer who swings and misses. But Elizabeth Holmes forces us to ask a harder question. Where is the line between vision and delusion, between ambition and deception, between the audacity to believe you can change the world and the criminal decision to pretend you already have? That line exists. And when you cross it, no matter how compelling your story, no matter how powerful the people in your corner, the truth has a way of drawing you back across it. This has been the Boardroom Files. If this story kept you in your seat, subscribe. Because the next story we're telling makes this one look like a warm-up. We'll see you in the boardroom.